This is the entire history of the Crusades in 4 minutes. Let's go back to the year 700 AD, when the Muslims had taken control of Jerusalem and most of the Middle East. Over the next couple centuries, Christian pilgrims started making their way over there for religious purposes, but they were often getting mugged along the way. And in 1095, Pope Urban II decided enough was enough. He called for an international council of European Christians to take Jerusalem back so that pilgrims could get there safely. This call to arms would end up being one of the worst miscalculations in church history, because not only did these Christians take Jerusalem, they took way too much of it. The First Crusade, lasting from 1096 to 1099, was not well organized. It wasn't a single army led by the Pope himself. Instead, it was a bunch of smaller groups led by local nobles who answered the call for arms. One of those groups was the People's Crusade, a ragtag band of commoners led by the charismatic Peter the Hermit. They set out in 1096, but turned back after hearing that the nearby Muslim armies were 20,000 strong, while they only had 20,000 people. But another group of nobles, Godfried of Bouillon, Raymond of Toulouse, and Bohemond of Taranto, all with last names that sound like they should be in a heavy metal band, pushed on towards Jerusalem anyway. They fought their way through Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, before reaching the city of Antioch. The siege here lasted 8 months and was almost certainly going to fail until some major plot armor showed up in the form of a traitor who opened the gates at night so the Christians could sneak in and take the city. From here, they continued east until they reached the gates of Jerusalem, which they promptly besieged. The siege lasted 2 weeks and the casualties on both sides were very high. But finally, on July 1099, the gate of the city opened. The Crusaders walked in and took it for good. They pillaged the city, killing hundreds of Jews and Muslims, including some of the most powerful leaders in the region. Jerusalem was now in Christian hands, and this moment was the high point of the First Crusade. But the Crusaders quickly found out that maintaining control of Jerusalem was more difficult than taking it. There weren't enough European Christians to actually live in the city, so instead they set up 4 Crusader states around it. Godfrey became the first ruler of what would become known as the Kingdom of Jerusalem. But just because the First Crusade ended successfully doesn't mean the Second Crusade started successfully. That's because while the First Crusade was about seizing Jerusalem, the Second Crusade, which lasted from 1147 to 1148, was about defending it. The reason for this was twofold. A neighboring Muslim leader named Zengi had seized the city of Edessa in 1144 and Christian. Lords in the area wanted the Pope to help them take it back. And B, the Church needed more European Christians to settle in the Holy Land. So it encouraged people to go there by promising them goddess forgiveness if they died on the way. But once again, the European nobles weren't able to get their people there. In fact, Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany, who were supposed to lead the crusade, didn't even make it out of modern-day Turkey. Not exactly a great start. Louis marched his troops into Anatolia, the modern-day Turkey, and immediately ran into some problems. His supply lines were cut, and his troops got absolutely wrecked by the Turkish Sultan Kilij Arslan II. So he turned around and headed home. Meanwhile, Conrad managed to get his forces together and do a little bit better, but still suffered significant losses. So, as soon as they heard about the defeats of their leaders, many of the German and French troops said, "Oh yeah, I'm out." They abandoned the mission and went home. So, overall, the Second Crusade can really be summarized as European Christians going to the Middle East, getting their butts kicked and coming home. But the next 2 Crusades I'll talk about were a little bit different because they weren't really Crusades. Wait, what? What do you mean? Well, see, while the goal of the previous Crusades was to take Jerusalem, the Third Crusade starting in 1189 was more of a, hey, let's get that guy back type crusade. And the guy they wanted was a guy named Richard the Lionheart, also known as Richard I, King of England, who got captured by the Muslims on his way back to Europe and spent 6 years in prison until he was ransomed out in 1194. But while Richard was gone, his older brother, King John of England, sold off a lot of land in Ireland to the French, and the Irish were furious. So, when Richard came back to England in 1194, he got involved in a war with France over this disputed territory. While Richard was marching his troops toward the front, news broke that King John had died. This meant Richard inherited the throne and promptly left for home. As he passed through Normandy, he made one last stop at the town of Calais, where he died of a wound sustained in battle. Back in the Holy Land, Saladin, the great Muslim leader, had united most of the region under his banner and was proving to be a tough opponent for the Crusader states. This led Pope Gregory VIII to call for the Fourth Crusade in 1202, which was supposed to be a massive effort to defeat Saladin and capture Jerusalem. But once again, internal problems in Europe caused major issues for the crusade. The Venetian Republic had been at war with the Byzantines, and they offered the Crusaders a deal: transport them to the Middle East for free if they helped them capture Zara, a port city in modern-day Croatia. This was bad since Zara was a Catholic city, but the Crusaders agreed. After sacking Zara, they sailed on to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. And despite assurances from the Pope that they wouldn't be attacked for participating in the crusade, the Crusaders went ahead and sacked the city. With this embarrassing display of Christianity, the real crusade never happened, and instead we got the Fifth Crusade between 1217 and 1221, which mostly took place in Egypt. This crusade was a little bit different because it was the first one led by the Egyptian Sultan Al-Kamil, who brought together the armies of France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire. Once again, though, internal arguments hurt the effectiveness of the crusade. The French and the Germans couldn't decide on strategy and eventually just went home, leaving the English to continue the fight alone. They succeeded in capturing the city of Damietta, but after 2 years of fighting, they were forced to retreat to their base in Cyprus. The English were actually given an offer to end the crusade peacefully, but it was rejected. So basically this crusade was a big "look how cool we are" moment for the Europeans and a big embarrassment for the Church, which probably explains why no one went on the Sixth Crusade. Instead, the next crusade to happen was the Seventh in 1248, which was a personal crusade by King Louis IX of France. Louis wanted to live up to his namesake's reputation and march his army to Jerusalem, but once again, internal problems caused him to turn back. He had to deal with rebellions in his own kingdom, and after hearing reports that his army was low on supplies and morale, he went home. During this time period, the Mongol Empire was growing across Asia and the Middle East, and by 1258, they had conquered Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. Many Muslims saw the Mongols as a greater threat than the Crusaders, so they made a deal with them. And if you want to hear the story of how this worked out for them, you're going to have to watch my video on Hulagu Khan, because I don't have time to cover it here. The next crusade was the 8th in 1270, and it was doomed from the start. The leader, King Edward I of England, died aboard his ship en route to the Holy Land. And his successor, King Henry III, had no interest in continuing it. The Ninth Crusade was pretty similar. It started in 1271 when the German King Rudolf I pledged to liberate Jerusalem, but he died in 1291 before any fighting took place. That last crusade would come a little over 50 years. Later, in 1346, when King Edward the Black Prince of England and his counselors decided to invade the Ottoman Empire, which was by far the greatest military force in the Middle East at the time, they lost badly. The Black Prince caught malaria and died on the way home, and most of the surviving English went to prison. So, after 200 years of launching crusades into the Middle East, the Europeans had nothing to show for it but embarrassment and a few small areas of land on the Mediterranean coast. The Crusades might not have achieved their initial goals, but they did have some interesting consequences. First, it led to the creation of some of the most powerful Italian states like Venice and Genoa. Second, the influx of gold and silver from the Middle East caused some inflation in Europe. And third, the Crusades created some lasting animosity between European Christians and Muslims that continues to this day. But if you want to learn more about this period of history, check out the series in the description below. And thank you for watching.